Ceremony and ritual get a bad rap for being empty habitual gesture, and far too often they are. But could it be that in leaving those things behind, we gut the heart of our spirituality? I approach issues like this as a spiritual director. So yeah, I'm interested in the theology behind our practices, but rather than get hung up in the arguments, I want to focus on the function of these practices, their practical effects. We don't just perform them because they have meaning, we perform them because they change us. And because they have a function, I'm more interested in recovering and restoring meaning than neglecting and rejecting ceremony because it's lost meaning. Is it possible that we suffer for lack of the very change that the ritual gestures are supposed to bring about in us? Because spirituality thrives in a context of received tradition, and it dies out wherever tradition is lost or neglected. So maybe a tradition doesn't always bear the fruit we want, but spirituality still needs a tradition like plants need soil. We could go really deep talking about the value of various rituals, but I want to talk about sacramentalism in general. We have a specific set of rituals that are supposed to mediate religious experience for us. Why? What's the net effect of engaging in these various behaviors, of seeking experience of the divine? Let's look at what sacraments are and how they work. The central defining act for traditional Christians is the Eucharist. Communion, the Lord's Supper, whatever you want to call it. And without getting into specific philosophical questions about it, the mystery is pretty straightforward. Here we have ordinary bread and ordinary wine. They're bread and wine in every way. Ordinary, common. And we say, in this ceremony, bread is body and wine is blood. Set aside the question of how this is the case. Focus on the fact that we have something ordinary and common, and something else is true about it also. It is bread, but it's not just bread. And it is wine, but it's not just wine. What we're doing is creating multiple layers of meaning in an ordinary situation. So when we do something ordinary, like eat bread and drink wine, something extraordinary is happening at the same time. So when you start to practice this ritual over and over again, the very concept of bread starts to take on a deeper and richer meaning. And the same is true with the wine. Eventually, it's not just the sacred elements that are special, but because of the sacredness of those elements, all bread is not just bread. All wine is not just wine. The sacredness of the ritual moment is supposed to spill out into the ordinariness of the rest of your life. And so for spiritually mature Christians, there's no such thing as just bread. There's no such thing as just water. All water is holy. There's no such thing as just wind, because all wind is the movement of the Spirit. There's no such thing as just fire. There's no such thing as just a towel. There's no such thing as just a meal, just a kind word, just a moment of clarity. All of these things, by their very nature, are sacred and holy once you've learned to see the world that way. But what is supposed to be the universal change that happens in our spiritual lives because of the sacraments? They're supposed to teach us a different way of seeing, which we call spiritual vision. We're not looking at some other spiritual realm. It's this world that we're looking at. We're still seeing the same ordinary reality as everyone else, but when we see it, it isn't just ordinary anymore. Everything in its ordinariness has become extraordinary. We're seeing reality, but we're seeing a richness and depth to reality that we didn't have access to before. It's like augmented reality in a way, except the new richness and depth isn't something added to reality. It is reality that we just weren't able to see before. And that's why, even though it's problematic from a disability studies perspective, blindness and vision is such a dominant theme in the New Testament. One of the foremost questions on their mind was, are you able to see the full depth of reality, or are you blind to it? It wasn't just an incidental question. It was at the very heart of spirituality itself. And that's why we immediately began to develop the sacraments. We needed a way to train people to see more clearly, to be able to engage the full depth of this life. Sacraments are designed to prepare us to see the whole world differently, potentially to see ourselves and each other differently, to challenge us to engage the multiple layers of meaning in our ordinary lives, to awaken in us a sense of wonder and expectation, to create in us a posture of anticipation. Anticipation of what? Of that moment when suddenly water isn't just water. Wind isn't just wind. Bread isn't just bread. A bath isn't just a bath. An embrace isn't just an embrace. A kind word isn't just a kind word. And when, without warning, any ordinary thing can suddenly become flush with holiness. The ordinary is still true and real, but there's something entirely other happening in and around the ordinary. And so sacraments are a formation process to help us become the kind of people who are spiritually aware. They're supposed to enable our spirituality. They're clear markers that point toward the spiritual in hopes that eventually our eyes will shift and be able to focus and recognize it. They're like lived out versions of those magic eye posters. Once you've been able to see through for the first time, you can begin to repeat that experience. And once you become adept enough, you can begin to see your whole life with that kind of spiritual vision. So I'm curious, is this something you can relate to? Have you had that moment when suddenly you can see through? And what was it that clicked for you? What was it that helped you see something other in the ordinary? What was it that helped you recognize the extraordinary beauty of ordinary life? Please leave any thoughts, reactions, questions you have in the comment section below. I promise I'll try to respond to those. And if you want to see more videos like this, the best thing you can do is subscribe, share my videos with someone else who might appreciate them, like, comment. All of those things are supportive and I appreciate it. And whether you do any of those things or not, thanks for watching.